Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the city of Edo 300 years ago. By day it is orderly, bustling, disciplined. But when the sun dips behind the tiled roofs and the lanterns flicker to life, a hidden world awakens. Behind the crimson glow of paper lanterns lies Yoshiwara, a place where beauty was currency, desire was ritual. And every whispered promise carried a secret price. Tonight we step past the gates of this forbidden quarter, not as historians, not as travelers, but as silent guests invited to wander the veiled nights of Edo Japan. The entrance to Yoshiwara was no ordinary street corner. It was a gate, tall, wooden, and flanked by guards who watched every man who entered. Behind it stretched a single road, a long corridor lined with glowing lanterns, leading deeper into the quarter like a tunnel of red fireflies. To cross that gate was to leave Edo behind. The laws of the shogun still applied, but the rhythms of life shifted here. This was the ukiyo, the floating world, a place where desire and illusion mingled until they became impossible to tell apart. Merchants, though low in the rigid hierarchy of samurai Japan, could walk here with heads high, for their purses spoke louder than their titles. Poets and playwrights slipped inside, seeking inspiration in the rustle of silk sleeves and the soft laughter of women behind latticed screens. Samurai, forbidden to bring swords into the quarter, left their honor at the threshold, stepping inside not as warriors but as dreamers. As we pass through, imagine the sounds, the faint splash of getter sandals on damp stones, the rattle of wooden shutters sliding open, the distant hum of a shamisen drifting across the air. The scent of grilled eel and sweet rice cakes mingles with incense, creating an aroma both comforting and dangerous, as if promising pleasure but whispering of debts to come. And then the first sight, the oiran, high-ranking courtesans parading in slow procession. Their silk robes shimmer with embroidered cranes and peonies. Their hair, towering and adorned with golden pins, catches the lantern light like a crown of fire. Each step is deliberate, heavy wooden sandals echoing against the stones. Behind them trail attendants carrying fans and lanterns, as if the very night bends to their presence. Here beauty is power, and power in Yoshiwara could be bought, though never cheaply. The parade was more than spectacle, it was ritual. Every few nights, the highest-ranking courtesans, the oiran, would leave their houses and step into the main street, accompanied by attendants, musicians, and the silent awe of onlookers. They did not walk quickly. No, their movements were a performance in themselves. Each oiran wore sandals so tall they seemed impossible to balance on. And yet, with every measured step, she displayed not just grace but command, as though the ground itself bent to her pace. The kimono she wore was a tapestry of secrets, layers upon layers of silk, embroidered with blossoms, birds, or golden waves. Each design chosen not merely for beauty but for symbolism. Cranes for longevity, peonies for wealth, pine for eternal strength. The weight of those robes could crush an ordinary woman. But here in the lantern glow, the oiran bore them as lightly as clouds. Men gathered in silence along the road. Some lowered their eyes in reverence. Others let their gazes linger too long, drunk on silken color and perfume carried in the night air. Few would ever speak to such a woman. Fewer still could afford her company. To be chosen, to even receive a glance, was to feel as if fortune itself had smiled upon you. And so, the parade was both invitation and rejection. It was theater, economics, and seduction braided into one. The courtesan was untouchable, yet her very presence made the crowd ache with longing. This was Yoshiwara's greatest illusion. Desire performed not in private, but in public, a stage where every sigh, every step, every flicker of the lantern light was part of the play. You follow the courtesan's procession not with your feet, but with your imagination. The crowd fades, the lanterns dim, and at last the oiran steps inside one of the great ochaya, the tea houses of Yoshiwara. From the street, the building looks modest, wooden lattice windows, sliding doors, faint silhouettes moving in candlelight, but once you pass the threshold, the illusion changes. Tatami mats stretch underfoot, polished wood gleams, and the fragrance of incense clings to the air. The ochaya is not a place of chaos. It is a carefully orchestrated stage where desire wears the mask of elegance. Inside, wealthy merchants, poets, and sometimes even samurai sit in small circles, cups of sake balanced between their fingers. They laugh too loudly, whisper too softly, trying to appear relaxed, though their hearts beat faster than the shamisen strings playing in the corner. Behind the screens, courtesans move like shadows of a dream. Some pluck at the shamisen, coaxing gentle notes that ripple like water. The others kneel gracefully, pouring sake with a smile that feels both intimate and unreachable. The line between host and guest blurs here, not because of love, but because of ritual. Every gesture is rehearsed. The angle of a bow, the length of an embrace, even the pauses between words. The courtesan is actress, poet, and philosopher. She speaks in riddles of longing, recites verses of moonlight, and always leaves her guest with the sense that they are standing on the edge of a dream they cannot hold. The ochaya was never simply a tea house. It was a theater of whispers, where secrets were traded like coins, and where the boundary between truth and performance dissolved in the haze of sake and smoke. Desire in Yoshiwara was never free. Behind the shimmering silks and painted smiles, every meeting was bound by contracts, every gesture weighed in coin, and every night tangled with obligations far larger than pleasure. The courtesans were called yujo, women of play, but their world was anything but playful. To ascend to the status of an oiran, a courtesan trained for years in poetry, music, calligraphy, and etiquette, she was not bought cheaply. Her presence was a privilege reserved for men with wealth and influence who could afford not just her company, but the prestige of being seen beside her. Yet beneath the ritual lay harsher truths. When a client entered the ochaya, he did not pay for a single evening. Often he entered a contract, a series of costly gifts, visits, and promises that might last months or years. The courtesan, bound by rules and the will of her brothel, had little choice but to play her part with grace, no matter the man's character. And here lies the paradox. While outsiders imagined Yoshiwara as a realm of freedom and indulgence, for the women inside it was a cage gilded with gold leaf. They could not leave without paying debts so vast they seemed eternal. Many were sold into this life as children, their beauty measured like silk, their future signed away in ink before they had learned to write their own names. Even politics crept between the screens. Powerful merchants used their patronage to boast of influence. Samurai and minor nobles sought status through their ties with celebrated courtesans, and courtesans themselves, skilled in conversation and intrigue, became unwitting messengers of secrets. Words murmured over sake often carried farther than the men who spoke them intended. The true price of Yoshiwara was not measured only in gold. It was measured in years of youth traded for survival. in reputations lost or gained, in silent bargains struck beneath the crimson lanterns. Every smile concealed a calculation. Every sigh was a performance, and every guest, no matter how wealthy, always left knowing the courtesan belonged more to the world of ritual than to him. Step now quietly into the Ochaya, the tea house of Yoshiwara. The shoji screens slide open with a soft sigh, and the air shifts, fragrant with burning incense, faintly sweet with sake. Here the world slows. Every movement, every glance is choreographed like a sacred play. For a guest, the first meeting with an oiran was not simple. It was ceremony. You were not greeted with eager smiles or hurried affection. No. She appeared only after a long wait, surrounded by attendants who trailed like shadows. She entered slowly, her towering hairpins glinting like stars, her steps measured beneath the weight of her elaborate kimono. Each fold of silk whispered a story of discipline, of beauty sharpened into ritual. When she sat, she did not look at you directly. Her eyes lowered, her fan half lifted, her words offered with practiced distance. For in Yoshiwara, intimacy began with distance. A courtesan's power lay not in giving herself freely, but in holding herself just out of reach. The first sake cup was poured deliberately, the porcelain cool against your hand. A poem might be recited or a witty remark offered, a test subtle and unspoken. Could you keep pace with her mind, not only her beauty? Could you match her elegance with wit, with poetry, with restraint? This ritual was not just flirtation, it was negotiation. Behind the fan, behind the painted lips, she measured your worth. Not only your wealth, but your patience, your manners, your capacity to honor the game. To rush was to fail. To fumble was to shame yourself. And so the evening unfolded like a play, each gesture a line, each silence a pause heavy with meaning. Only after several meetings, only after costly offerings and proof of devotion, might the courtesan lower her guard. But even then, desire was always framed as art, never as impulse. Yoshiwara's first meetings were not about possession. They were about illusion. Illusion that you were chosen. Illusion that love could be bought. Illusion that for one fleeting night, the world outside the lantern-lit streets did not exist. Imagine now the streets of Edo as dusk settles, lanterns glowing like a river of fire in the night. A hush falls over the crowd, then a murmur of awe ripples forward. The gates of Yoshiwara part and the procession begins. The Oiran Dochu, the parade of the courtesans. At its center, the Oiran herself. She does not walk quickly. No, her pace is deliberate, almost impossibly slow, for she wears the towering wooden clogs called koma geta, nearly a foot high. Each step is measured, her toes pointing inward, her silken sleeves trailing like waves of color. Behind her trails a train of attendants, young apprentices in bright kimono, holding lanterns, fanning incense, whispering words of reverence. Her hair is a tower of lacquer and pins, studded with gold and tortoiseshell, glimmering in the lantern light. Her kimono, layered in impossible folds, is so heavy it takes two to adjust. Crimson, indigo, and gold shimmer with each careful turn. She is not a woman walking. She is a living work of art. Crowds gather, yet none dare approach too close. The Oiran does not smile at strangers. Her gaze passes over the crowd with practiced indifference, her fan lifting now and then as if to veil a secret thought. This distance was her power. The more unattainable she appeared, the greater her allure. For the townsfolk, the parade was spectacle, a glimpse of wealth and elegance they would never touch. For merchants, it was advertisement, proof of Yoshiwara's magnificence. For the courtesan, it was performance. Every step a declaration that beauty itself could be elevated into ritual. And when she passed, the street seemed dimmer, as though the lanterns had burned just a little less brightly in her absence. The Oiran returned to the Ochaya, her image lingering in the minds of all who watched. Half woman, half myth, entirely untouchable. When the parade ended, when the lanterns outside dimmed and the footsteps of the crowd faded, another world began, one hidden behind the sliding doors of the Ochaya. Here, the courtesan transformed. No longer the distant figure gliding in impossible shoes, she became something softer, more human, though still never fully attainable. The guest, having paid dearly for the honor, entered a room washed in candlelight. Tatami mats smelled faintly of rice and smoke. A brazier warmed the air, and shadows danced across painted screens of cranes and plum blossoms. He would sit, nervous, sipping sake, while musicians tuned their shamisen in the corner. Then she arrived, not rushing, never hurrying. She knelt gracefully, bowing just enough to show courtesy, not so much as to suggest subservience. Her eyes lingered on his for a moment too long, then drifted away as if she already knew his secrets. The conversation began, but this was no simple chatter. Every word was performance. She laughed when the moment demanded, sighed at the right pause, and let silence stretch just long enough to stir unease. Her gestures, pouring tea, touching the rim of her cup, adjusting a strand of hair, were rehearsed as carefully as any play. It was an illusion of intimacy, a dance of words and glances. The guest might believe he had captured her attention, perhaps even her heart. But the truth was different. She belonged to no man in that room. Her allure came not from what she gave, but from what she withheld. Behind those closed doors, desire was not consummation, but choreography. Every sigh, every smile, every lingering look was a carefully placed thread in a tapestry designed to entangle the guest, to leave him longing, returning, paying again and again for the promise of something always just out of reach. In that candle-lit silence, the courtesan was both dream and mirror, reflecting not who she was, but who the guest wished her to be. Though Yoshiwara appeared as a floating world of beauty and pleasure, beneath the silken surface lay a hierarchy as rigid as the shogun's court. At the very top stood the Oiran, women so rare and exalted that their names alone could draw crowds to the streets. They lived like queens of the quarter, commanding prices so high that only daimyo, wealthy merchants, or powerful courtiers could hope to sit in their presence. An evening with an Oiran was not purchased in coin alone. It demanded connections, reputation, and ritual. Beneath them were the koshi and chusan, women of grace but fewer privileges, whose fates depended on their ability to charm, to sing, to pour sake with just the right curve of the wrist. And lower still, the tsubone and shinzo, apprentices barely in their teens, watching, learning, waiting for the day they might ascend. Yet even here, in this hierarchy of beauty, survival was never guaranteed. Rivalries bloomed behind painted fans. A single misstep, a scandal whispered too loudly, could bring a courtesan tumbling down the ladder she had spent years climbing. To rise was to master not only the arts of dance and conversation, but the subtler art of strategy, forging alliances with brothel owners, cultivating loyal patrons, and outshining rivals in every public procession. The hairpins in a courtesan's coiffure were more than ornaments. They were weapons in a silent war for position, for permanence in a world designed to consume them. The guest saw only the illusion, silk, laughter, and the glimmer of painted lips. But behind that stage, the women lived within invisible rules as strict as any samurai code. One false rumor, one jealous rival, and the lantern light that once crowned them could fade into shadow. Yoshiwara was not only a theater of desire. It was a battlefield, fought not with swords but with charm, whispers, and survival. Seduction in Yoshiwara was never clumsy, never rushed. It was a performance, a choreography crafted as carefully as a no play. Every glance, every gesture, every pause in conversation carried meaning. When a guest was received, the courtesan did not leap to please. She held him at a distance, her eyes lowered just enough to suggest modesty, yet raised in fleeting moments to spark anticipation. A single smile withheld until the perfect pause could be worth more than the jewels he carried in his sleeves. The pouring of sake became an art form. The courtesan's hand did not simply lift the flask. It curved like a calligrapher's brushstroke, pausing just long enough for the guest to notice the subtle tremor of her sleeve, embroidered with cranes in flight. The cup filled slowly, and when she finally extended it, her fingertips brushed his. A touch so fleeting it might have been imagined. But the illusion lingered, heavy as incense. Words, too, were a dance. The courtesan was trained in poetry, in witty repartee, in the subtle innuendo that could make a man feel both powerful and powerless. She might recite a verse about the moon hidden behind clouds, her voice low, her meaning veiled, leaving the guest to wonder if she spoke of the weather or of herself. And then there were the silences, long, deliberate silences that pulled the guest deeper into the game. In those pauses, the creak of floorboards, the distant cry of a nightbird, even the faint rustle of silk became part of the seduction. It was theater in which the audience was both participant and prey. This was not the raw hunger of the flesh, but a labyrinth of ritual where desire was sharpened by patience, by restraint, by the careful withholding of what was most craved. In Yoshiwara, seduction was not about possession. It was about pursuit, an endless chase lit by crimson lanterns, where the prize was never truly won, only imagined. Behind the painted screens of Yoshiwara, where golden cranes soared over silk clouds and pine trees curved in eternal grace, whispered truths often outweighed spoken ones. These screens, sliding easily on their wooden frames, were more than decorations. They were barriers, concealments, and sometimes witnesses. On one side, a courtesan entertained her guest with laughter soft as falling petals. On the other side, another guest, drunk on sake and vanity, confessed secrets he should never have spoken. Political schemes, merchant rivalries, family disgraces, all spilled into the smoke-filled air, carried like embers in the hush of night. The women of Yoshiwara were not mere listeners. They were archivists of whispers. Every tilt of the head, every polite nod was a page in a secret book that could never be written, but was always remembered. They knew which daimyo favored which bribes, which merchant plotted to ruin a rival, which samurai trembled with shame under the weight of unspoken debts. And sometimes those secrets were weapons. A courtesan could ruin a man with a single whispered truth, traded carefully in the right ear. Not because she sought cruelty, but because survival demanded leverage. Beauty was fleeting, but knowledge lingered like incense smoke long after the flame had gone out. Yet betrayal was not confined to men. Behind the screens, rival courtesans watched each other with painted smiles and calculating eyes. A misplaced rumor, a stolen patron, a subtle insult hidden in a poem. The game was as cutthroat as it was elegant. To rise meant to push another down. To survive meant never lowering one's guard, even in moments of laughter. The guests believed themselves hunters, prowling these halls of silk and light. But more often they were prey, tangled not in webs of desire alone, but in traps of intrigue spun with invisible threads. And the screens bore silent witness, their lacquered surfaces reflecting only what the room wished to reveal, never the truth it concealed. Here, in the crimson-lit labyrinth, betrayal was not a tragedy. It was ritual. Pleasure in Yoshiwara was never free. Beneath the silk screens and the flickering lanterns, every sigh, every smile, every fleeting glance carried a hidden cost. For the wealthy daimyo or the prosperous merchant, a single night in the pleasure quarters could equal a year's harvest for a village. The courtesans wore robes embroidered with gold thread, but the true price lay not in fabric, nor in the sake poured endlessly into porcelain cups. It lay in the illusion of intimacy, the feeling that for a moment the world beyond the crimson walls did not exist. Some men squandered fortunes here. They arrived in lacquered palanquins, drunk on wealth, and left staggering into the mist. Their purses emptied, their reputations frayed. Others returned again and again, chasing the same courtesan's smile, as though it were a charm against the loneliness waiting at home. To lose money was expected. To lose one's soul, that was the danger few spoke of. And yet the courtesans themselves bore the heavier weight. Behind the gleaming hairpins and painted faces, many were bound not by choice but by debt. Families who could not afford survival sold daughters into contracts that stretched across decades. The women became blossoms displayed in gilded cages, their lives measured not in years, but in patrons and payments. Some found fleeting freedom in the attentions of powerful men, who might pay their contract and carry them away. Others never escaped, their beauty fading before their debts were repaid, their names erased as younger faces replaced them in the lantern-lit halls. For both guest and courtesan, the price of Yoshiwara was more than coin. It was dignity, freedom, and sometimes the slow erosion of hope. The red lanterns glowed like promises, but beneath their light lingered the shadow of despair. Here in Edo's forbidden quarter, pleasure was always entwined with loss. Every cup of sake carried bitterness, every song ended in silence, and every smile, no matter how radiant, concealed a quiet sorrow. In Yoshiwara, beauty was everything, and beauty was fleeting. The painted faces, so carefully powdered to perfection, could not hold back the march of years. Every courtesan knew this, though it was rarely spoken aloud. The younger ones, fresh as spring blossoms, laughed without fear. But in the quiet corridors, the older women moved more slowly, their eyes heavy with memories that no paintbrush could conceal. Time in Yoshiwara was crueler than in the outside world. A single season could decide whether a courtesan rose to fame or slipped into obscurity. The patrons, ever hungry for novelty, favored youth above all else. And so, as the years passed, even the most skilled courtesans found themselves standing longer in the shadows, waiting for doors that no longer opened. Some tried to cling to the illusion, dressing in brighter colors, singing songs with more vigor, weaving laughter even when their hearts were weary. Others accepted their fading light, retreating quietly into the background, offering advice to the younger women who listened with half an ear, too certain that their beauty would never fade, but it always did. And for the patrons, too, time left its scars. The once bold samurai grew old, their hair streaked with gray, their swords traded for walking sticks. Merchants who once threw gold like petals now clutched their purses more tightly, haunted by debts and regrets. Yoshiwara thrived on illusion, but it could not escape truth. Beauty dims, wealth vanishes, and even the most radiant nights must end. Yet within that inevitability lay a strange tenderness. For those who stayed long enough to see time strip away the masks, there was something deeper than desire. A quiet recognition, a shared humanity, an acceptance that all lanterns, no matter how bright, eventually burn low. In those final seasons, when makeup could no longer hide the lines of the years, the courtesans carried a different kind of beauty, not the kind that dazzled, but the kind that endured. A beauty carved from memory, from resilience, from having survived within the crimson shadows of Yoshiwara. And as the lanterns flickered above their heads, they understood better than anyone the true cost of fleeting youth. Yoshiwara was not only a place of beauty and ritual, it was also a place of secrets, scandals, and whispers that never made it into the official histories. Behind the paper walls, promises were made and broken in a single night. A merchant might pledge his fortune to a courtesan, swearing eternal devotion, only to vanish by dawn. A samurai, drunk on sake and desire, might reveal secrets of his lord's household. Words that could ruin lives if repeated outside the quarter. These stories drifted like smoke, lingering in the air, always half believed, always half denied. And then there were the darker tales, the ones murmured when the lanterns burned low. Stories of jealous lovers who poisoned rivals with powders slipped into tea. Of courtesans who, despairing of freedom, tied silken cords to the beams and left their spirits wandering the brothels, their perfume lingering long after their bodies were gone. The people of Edo whispered that Yoshiwara was haunted, that if you walked its alleys at dawn, when the mist clung to the ground, you could hear voices, soft laughter, faint sobbing, carried by the wind. Some said the lanterns flickered not only with flame, but with restless souls who could not bear to leave the only world they had known. For the women, these stories were both warning and comfort. A warning, because they knew despair lurked at the edges of their lives. A comfort, because if they died within those walls, they would not be forgotten entirely. Their spirits would remain, glowing faintly among the lanterns, forever part of Yoshiwara's forbidden nights. And yet, despite the scandals, despite the ghosts, Yoshiwara endured. Patrons still came, courtesans still sang, and the lanterns still burned red. Because the allure of the forbidden was stronger than fear. The risk, the secrecy, the hint of danger, these only deepened Yoshiwara's spell. Every whispered rumor, every haunting tale, every scandalous night only made the quarter more irresistible. For in Edo, as in all ages, people were drawn not only to beauty, but to mystery. And Yoshiwara promised both. Wrapped in silk, shadow, and sin, every world of splendor eventually fades, and Yoshiwara was no exception. For more than 2 centuries, the quarter burned with crimson light, its fame spreading beyond Edo, beyond Japan itself. Foreign travelers wrote of its courtesans as if they were mythical beings. Poets compared their dances to falling blossoms, their voices to autumn wind. But behind the beauty, change was always stirring. By the late 19th century, Edo had become Tokyo. The old shogunate was gone, replaced by a modernizing empire eager to imitate the West. With new laws, new morals, and new industries, the Yoshiwara district no longer stood untouched. The world outside its walls had grown louder, faster, harsher. Railways rattled the ground, newspapers carried scandal to every doorstep. and the courtesans who once embodied elegance found themselves part of a vanishing world. Fires swept through the district more than once, as if the gods themselves wanted to erase it. The great Kanto earthquake of 1923 reduced much of it to rubble. Yet even then Yoshiwara rebuilt, its lanterns glowing once more. But the spell was broken. By the 20th century, the age of courtesans, of ritualized desire and forbidden nights, gave way to a more commercial, more hurried kind of pleasure, and yet memory lingers. Today, the Yoshiwara quarter is gone, paved over by ordinary streets and apartments. The wooden gates are no longer there to keep secrets in. But if you walk those alleys in the quiet hours before dawn, some say the air still hums with echoes. The faint chime of shamisen strings, the rustle of silk brushing against wooden floors, the soft laughter of women who once ruled the night. History records Yoshiwara as a pleasure district, a place of indulgence and scandal. But to the women who lived there, it was a stage of survival. A world where beauty became weapon and ritual became armor. They danced, sang, and whispered their way into memory, leaving behind not just scandal but legend. And so as the lanterns fade in our imagination, Yoshiwara remains. Not on maps, not in streets, but in the hidden corners of history, where forbidden nights glow forever. And now as our wandering through Yoshiwara comes to an end, let the lanterns dim softly in your mind. The sounds of shamisen fade, the laughter grows distant, and the crimson glow dissolves into quiet night. You are no longer in Edo. You are here, in the stillness of your own room. Safe, warm breathing slowly, each breath a little deeper, each thought a little lighter. The courtesans, the rituals, the forbidden nights, they drift away like smoke, leaving only a gentle calm. Let your eyelids grow heavier. Let your body sink into the quiet. Tonight, history has kept you company, and now it releases you into sleep. Rest well, dream softly, until the next story calls.